This is the start of my new combined army Infinity Force, and in this video I'm going to show you how I painted this futuristic color scheme, what influenced my choices, and where this project will go next. I played Infinity 20 years ago when it came out, and I really want to get back into it. One aspect of tabletop games that I enjoy immensely is collecting the models of the faction that I like, and I really want to collect this army and try to paint up as many of them as I can. Paint them up as a real eye-catcher and of course also play some games with them. I'm not a power gamer. I always choose the minis I want to field in a game based on their background and whether or not I like the look and their style, not if they are the best units in game. I want to relax, collect this faction and gradually watch it grow into the army it deserves to be. And hopefully you'll be along for the ride. Infinity's technology looks a bit more sleek and functional compared to, for example, 40K. Like what warfare could actually look like in a not so distant future. And what drew me to Combined Army is this look being dialed up to 11 with their alien appearance and their brutish tags and remotes and large variety of miniatures and styles. The Combined Army is a lot of factions rolled into one, and for me it makes perfect sense to collect that because I can choose from so many different models. It's never going to get boring. Also, they are the ultimate bad guys in the Infinity universe, threatening the existence of all of the human sphere. And sometimes it's good to be bad. Painting Infinity means that you are dealing mostly with metal models, and that comes with its own set of challenges. First of all, you will want to use some sturdy nippers to get rid of the connections needed to cast these minis free of air bubbles. Now and then you will see some leftover from the mold release agent on the minis, and sometimes this makes the primer not stick to the metal properly. But simply washing the minis with soapy water helps to get rid of it. Infinity's metal is rather soft, so you can use a regular hobby knife to cut it and remove the mold lines. But that also means if you drop any of these minis, they're pancakes. Metal minis are demanding a certain type of molds, and unlike injection steel molds that, for example, Games Workshop uses for plastic, these molds are prone to gradually breaking down over time and eventually failing. So you will occasionally find these lumps of metal caused by a damaged mold that obscure the detail. I like to get rid of these with a knife and then sand it smooth again. Finally, to assemble these you need to use super glue, and for some of the flimsier minis you might want to look into pinning them. Here I'm using an activator spray to cure the super glue instantly and create stronger bonds. Most of the elements that need to be glued fit together with these registration keys, so the parts fit together neatly, although this can be diminished if there is extra material from damaged molds. I like to add these scratches to larger surfaces that I glued together so the super glue has more surface to grab on and to form a stronger bond. I glued all the minis standing on tactical rocks to the bases so I could integrate them with the general base design, using milliput to create a slight slope towards these rubble parts. Then I picked some 3D printed parts that would fit, like pipes and steel beams and also rocks that looked similar to the ruins. I also made sure to have more plain bases, mostly covered with a thin layer of milliput and only minor details. Once everything was in place, I used a sponge to create texture, and then everything would be ready for priming. Infinity models are so detailed, and a lot of these details are so small that the primer doesn't reach everywhere. So I took an old brush and some black paint, and I made sure that all the tiny recesses are covered so I don't have a tiny sparkle smiling at me from the shadows. Speaking about shadows, I wanted to use a global shadow color to draw my guys together and make them look more like a coherent battle force. And I had a very particular magenta color in mind. Here's a problem though. Most magenta colors from these premix ranges have a lot of white in them, and for some reason I think white and shadows don't mix. Crazy idea, I know. And you can't just mix it in black, because black and white makes gray, and that looks dull and boring. And I wanted a dark yet vibrant color for these shadows. So I went with this Chimera magenta and I mixed in a bit of red ink to make it even more vibrant and intense, and leaning more towards the warmer side. I then sprayed this mix on all of the bases as well as every part of the mini that would be visible from below. One could say it's an anti-zenithal priming. You can see that there's a lot of variety in these Infinity minis. Even within a faction and even among infantry, you get light, medium and heavy infantry, and they all go into the same army. So to me, that's pretty exciting because every mini is slightly different. Now the challenge is to make them all look like they are part of the same army. I was pretty set on this olive green color for the armor plate, and coincidentally I picked a complementary color for the shadows. So that will add some nice additional contrast effects. Let me give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. And don't click away yet if you value your health, because health starts with your diet. Don't we all have that same problem? Too much work, and then we want to paint minis, get that army done, and there's no time to get some proper nutrition. Well, HelloFresh is here to help you with that. And I know what you're thinking, this is just another sponsor that you don't believe in, but they give you money. But this is where you're completely wrong. We've been ordering with HelloFresh for years now, as you can see, and that's not even all the meal cards. There's 2 more binders where these came from. HelloFresh delivers high quality ingredients to your door, and all you have to do is cook them, following these simple meal cards. And especially ever since our son was born, this has been a real time saver. No lengthy grocery shopping, and the meals are prepared in next to no time. But not only does HelloFresh help you stress less about your food, the price per serving makes grocery shopping pale in comparison, especially with everything getting more expensive recently. And it definitely blows takeout or eating out of the water. And with my discount code, it's practically a steal. The meals you can prepare look amazing and are super tasty. I really never want to go back to before I knew HelloFresh. And you know, they say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and I certainly agree. And when HelloFresh heard me say that, they were like, heck yeah. And now they're giving all subscribers free breakfast for life. And here's the kicker. If you join HelloFresh on this campaign, you will get 10 meals for free. I like to get to eat for free, and if you do so as well, click the link in the description or use my code to get 10 meals for free and free breakfast for life. That's 1 breakfast item per box as long as your subscription is active, if you're in the US. Outside of the US, local discounts will apply. I'm picking out all panels that are facing up with a solid layer of paint. This color will be my mid-tone, and it's kind of funny, this sort of becomes paint by numbers when you think of it. If a panel is facing up, fully painted in the olive mid-tone. If it slightly curves downward or it's slightly facing the ground, leave some of the dark magenta to show, and if it's facing straight down, leave the shadow color. Once everything is blocked in, I use a glaze consistency to feather out the transitions, using pigment pushing, starting in the darker area and pushing the pigments towards where the olive is already opaque. That creates a nice gradient without a lot of effort. I picked a brighter version of this olive green, and since I'll be using this armor color on most of my minis, but I'm not going to paint every mini of this army at once, using premix colors as much as possible will make remembering my approach really easy. Again, I was blocking in my first highlight, following a volumetric pattern, and feathered the transitions. As a last step, I picked out the edges and painted a bright reflection in the middle of the first highlight color to pump up the contrast. The Shaswasti are cunning and rely on spreading fear and paranoia among their enemies, and that shows in their playstyle and gear, which makes them a not so straightforward army to play, but I love that aspect from a lore perspective, and that's part of why I picked them as the core of my army. They're really sneaky, and a lot of them are stealthy boys, and I wanted to represent that on the minis by painting a camouflage field effect. So after I picked out a color for the stones, I ended up painting them in this beige gray tone. I extended that color onto the parts of the mini close to the stone, both legs and the hand touching it, leaving a sharp edge on the transition. Then I quickly highlighted the stones up and also used that same highlight color on the parts of the mini I painted stone gray. At that point, I wanted to continue with the effect of the camouflage field building up, but I realized I had to finish the other parts I have not painted yet, because otherwise I would just cover all the efforts of the special effect. I wanted that connective part of the armor to emit a slight glow, so I started to put down pure white paint on the bulging parts, leaving the recesses dark, and then started layering on fluorescent red. And in hindsight, I think the red looked great, and I should have maybe kept it, but I applied a second, more confined layer of white and then covered that with orange fluor paint. And don't get me wrong, I still like it, I just think the pure red was a slightly better fit for the rest of the colors. When that was done, I covered parts of the mini with masking putty so I wouldn't get overspray, and I made sure to cover the areas of the mini where I had the hard edge between the olive green and the gray, so I would get a sharp line there again once I started airbrushing on the white. So you see that this builds a gradient away from where the field ends and gives me a sharp white line after I got rid of the masking putty again. Next I sprayed some athematic blue contrast paint over the gradient, staining it in this bright turquoise, and the pre-established gradient gives this really cool fading effect. To make it look even brighter, I used some whites and put some dots and lines along the transition, and that was the camo effect done. With the main eye candy done, now I moved into the cloaks, and that means returning to painting by numbers. Just like with the armor, I left everything mostly facing down magenta, and everything else I covered in this mix of blue and black. I decided to go for a universal highlight color, so I also used green sky to gradually brighten the highlight areas, which made for a really subtle blue shine on black effect, and the icing on the cake was the magenta in the recesses, almost looking like a glow from below. There was only a few elements left to figure out. One of them was the face, for which I used a mix of beige brown and green sky to keep my palette limited, and then I gave it a recess wash of Sybarite green mixed with a little athematic blue, and then restored some of the highlights that got dulled down too much. On minis that are mechanized, you often have a plethora of different elements that you kind of want to distinguish, since, well, they are not quite armor, they're not quite flexible connective parts, so you need another color for them that fits your scheme, or at least doesn't ruin it and make your mini look like they accidentally ran into a festival of colors. The Noctifier had these elements on the back of the cloak, and the Shrouded had these additional armor and cloak elements that needed this treatment. And something that always works with any color scheme is adding black or white. So I used an off-white to highlight these elements, more of a bluish tone on the cloak, and straight up magenta shading on the cloak and armor of the Shrouded. I did some simple edge highlighting on the weapons and picked out the odd element in a brighter color to add some variety. The Noctifier weapon is a big part of the mini, and I didn't want him to just hold a giant black paddle, so I added a simple inner glow effect washing these elements first in red fluo, and then covering less area with orange and yellow fluo paint. With most of the scheme figured out, what was left to do was grind away and execute it on all of these core units of my new army. There's a few things I need to figure out still, but I think this is a solid base that can be adapted to all units. I'm looking forward to the new additions to this core. I already ordered the Avatar and the Bat Droids, as well as some weirder members of the family. If you want to learn more about the principles I base my army painting in, check out this video and you will eventually be able to find part 2 of my combined army project down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there. Or over there.